My name is Heather Donnell, and I'm a bookseller in Brooklyn. I run Honey and Wax Booksellers. We've been there for 6 years. And I was delighted to be asked to come here and talk about new trends in bibliography. At first, I was a little bit panicked because I don't think of myself as well, I mean, I practice bibliography, but I don't think of myself as someone who's really attuned to all the cutting-edge movements in bibliography.
But I realized, as I was thinking about it, that bibliography more broadly considered might actually be something that I have some recent experience with in the field. So I thought I would talk about that experience. I began in the book trade selling primarily high spots, classic, rare books. And when I started Honey and Wax, I wanted to do quite a bit of those classic books as well, but I also felt that there was a movement among younger collectors and people in general that a bookseller might be able to respond to, and I wanted to try to do that. I felt like even in a short period of time, the past decade, the way that people, regular people in the street, not professional bibliographers, had related to the printed word had really changed. When I started Honey and Wax, it was very much about the way that the ebook was going to change everything, and there were going to be no more books, and there were going to be no more booksellers, and no one was going to want anything printed anymore. And of course, that was not true at all. But what was interesting is that when it became the case that purchasing a printed book was no longer the default way of reading that book, when you had a chance to either buy the printed book or get it on your phone or read it on your computer, there were other options for you now. Everyone who was buying printed books was making a choice to experience print in a way that hadn't been the case for most of my life. And that choice was making a lot of people engage in behaviors that were very much collecting behaviors, even though they would never have considered themselves collectors or thought of themselves in those terms. It was a different frame, but the things they were doing were collecting. And I felt like there might be, book collecting might be something that could be more broadly defined than it typically was in the rare book trade. I wonder now if bibliography is something similar to that. If there are a lot of behaviors that approximate bibliography that are going on all around us by people who would never in a million years be in this room, but that nonetheless people are grappling with the physical object in a way that they maybe hadn't in the past. And so this is my story of an experiment that we recently did and what I learned from it. Bibliography in the wild, if you will, as opposed to the highly cultivated bibliography that we have here at the SA. One thing that Honey and Wax has always been very interested in, we've always really tried to be attuned to, are movements among young collectors, people who are just starting out collecting. And it's very much the case, since the trade, as some of you may be aware, tends to be a little bit melancholic and nostalgic in the way it approaches changes in collecting practice. I mean, I just spent literally my entire career in the rare book trade hearing about how young people don't collect, young people don't read, nobody buys books, nobody cares, and increasingly feeling that is just not true. One thing that I always loved to follow was the National Collegiate book collecting contest. Always read up on that, and I loved also Find Books and Collections series on bright young collectors, where they would pluck these people out and tell you about what they had found, and often it was so interesting and not what you were used to seeing. And so my partner Rebecca Romney and I last spring were talking about how much we liked this, and it was so great, and it struck us that one of the pleasures of running your own business is that you can just do whatever you want. And we thought, why can't we just have a prize? Why can't we just make a prize? And since we take a particular interest in the role of women on the buying and selling side of the book trade, we thought, what if we started a prize for a young woman book collector? Let's put down $1,000 for the best collection by an American woman 30 years old or younger. Let's just put it out there, see what we get, see what happens. And we felt like worst case scenario, we'd be out $1,000. But we'd also, some people would have written, essays about their collections. People would have thought about things. It might have planted a seed somewhere. Anyhow, it seemed like a fun thing to do. So last May, we issued a call for applications. And we weren't really sure what to expect. And in fact, we're advised to think like maybe you'll get 8 or 10 applications. And actually, we got 48. From people, it was exciting, from 21 states and the District of Columbia, women aged 15 to 30. And all of them wrote 1,500-word essays about their collection, how it got started, how it had developed, what they were most excited about, what they cared about, how they saw it developing. They also produced bibliographies and then wish lists of 3 books that they would like to add and why they would like to add that. So all through the summer, we were getting these emails from women all over the country, and it was really, really, it was really exciting, honestly. But one thing that we were noticing is that we had been a little bit uncertain about exactly how to describe the requirements of the bibliography, because we needed to see what their books were, and we needed to see that they knew what their books were. But at the same time, we couldn't go full-on Bowers on these people, right? On some high school student in, Oak Park, Illinois. Like, you cannot ask for. So we, what we found in the I would say that if you look at the submissions as a whole, the bibliographies were certainly the most challenging aspect, and they were also, in some respects, the sketchiest. And not, I think, entirely the fault of the applicants. In part, we bear responsibility because we weren't exactly sure how much to ask for. We didn't want to ask too many questions because then people would just feel like intimidated and they couldn't deal. So we, the bibliographies that we received moved from, we had one by a junior professor who had experience in rare books, which contained collation formulas for every book in the collection, at the one end, and then on the other hand, one woman actually asked if she could just send her Instagram feed. I said, no, absolutely not. We do have language about how, photographs are nice, but they are no substitute for careful bibliographic description. So anyhow, as we look towards the second year of the prize this year, I'm going to work on refining the language, and I suspect that you all will have many suggestions for how to do that in a positive way. So, in any event, we, because we wanted to see what would happen, we put it out there, we got these applications, we spent the summer reading them and passing around this Google Doc. And one thing that we noticed, I can talk about what they were collecting, because certainly there were trends and themes and that kind of thing, but I feel like almost the thing that for this audience is more interesting than the specific subject areas, was a very strong trend that really surprised us, which was that a solid percentage of the applicants and all 6 of the finalists already had a kind of public-facing aspect to their collection, even though they were quite young. In some way, they were using their collection to communicate with other people in an active, almost daily way. And that struck us as surprising because we had thought, sort of in more traditional rare book terms, that the publication of the collection is it's a late stage moment. It's your Grolier show, it's your auction catalog, it's your institutional acquisition. It's the moment when the big reveal, and you see all the work that has gone into it. But I think that living as we do in this age of social media, people are sharing everything all the time, and people who are just starting out are finding, they're sort of finding their people online in chat rooms, on message boards, on social media, on personal blogs. They're doing all kinds of things to connect with others, and all of it, not all of it, but a lot of it through the medium of photography, which is really, really problematic, as David was just describing for lots of reasons. But we were interested in it because we thought that the sort of traditional stereotype of the collector is someone who's in love with the hunt. But it seemed to us that the people who responded to the contest were at least as interested in sharing what they'd found as they were in trophy hunting. So it seemed kind of interesting. I guess the question is, does that count as bibliography? Does that kind of sharing, that kind of documenting of material and then sharing it with the world count as bibliography? Certainly not in a strict Bowsersian sense, but in a larger sense. I mean, if we're talking about, bibliography in the expanded field, which I think is the actual title of this panel, yes, I mean, I think we have to say that is, in fact, a bibliographic act that's happening, and happening by people who are not necessarily coming up through the collegiate collecting contests or through the kind of privileged academic backgrounds, because although we did have very strong applications from people who came through that, we also got applications from people who literally had not ever seen a rare book. Their collections were based on something totally different and on a very different kind of response to the material. So I say yes. That's what I'm saying. For the purposes of this panel, I'm saying yes, that is bibliography. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit, just for a few seconds, about a few of the applications we got and how they shared them, which I thought was interesting. One that was the youngest, she was a runner-up. She was 22 years old, from Wisconsin. A young woman who became obsessed with the geisha culture of Kyoto, of which there is apparently a passionate online community. And so she had been following from the time that she was a teenager, and she saw a National Geographic documentary about geisha. She had been involved in this kind of online community looking at the printed materials that came out every year in Kyoto for the various geisha sort of performances. And apparently a large online archive, people had just been scanning in stuff from Japan, but also like collectors all around the world, just massive photo groups. Apparently one of the biggest collectors pulled all his images because they were being copied and used without permission, and he was angry about his collection being sort of sent out into the wild and sort of misappropriated. But then it left other people really sort of bereft because they had counted on this resource that wasn't there. So when she was 18 or 19, she started just buying the material from Japanese dealers online, like just looking for ones she could afford and getting them, and then scanning them in and putting them back, trying to reconstitute this guy's work. But the truth is, it became this sort of group project across all these people were doing it, and sort of engaging in the imaginary recreation of this thing, drawing maps of the now vanished tea houses. I mean, trying to plot out all this stuff happened. I mean, that to us was fascinating because she had never been to Japan. She had never ever bought anything in her collection in a bookstore, because you can't go into a bookstore in her tiny town and buy this material. No, she had been finding it all online and getting it and putting it together and developing a narrative around it that was shared with all these people. And hers was primarily shared through Flickr, where she had 1,500 images. But she did, however, do a proper bibliography for the purposes of this contest. But that was one thing that was really interesting to us. That's going on. That's happening with people who are not scholars, but who are just passionate and interested. So we thought that was cool. Another thing that we thought was cool, which is completely kind of on the flip side, was a young woman in Queens, Southeast Queens, which is a neighborhood in New York City that, as you probably know, is gentrifying very quickly, transforming very quickly. She had lived there her whole life, and there were no bookstores in the neighborhood, but she was aware of writers from that neighborhood, many of them with small presses that were based in that neighborhood or self-published. And she started buying everything that she could find from writers in her neighborhood or that were published in her neighborhood, zines that were made in her neighborhood. And she developed this little archive of southeastern Queens over a period of about 20 years. And then she took it on the road and started showing up at street fairs and community festivals with the archive of the neighborhood's writers. And people were coming in, and she had social media so people could visit it online, but they would also come out and see it. And this is, again, someone who is by no means a professional bibliographer, but what she is doing has to be considered on some level bibliography. She is creating something and documenting it and telling a story about it in a way that is connecting other people to it. So we really liked her. She was another runner-up. And then our winner was in some ways, a more conventional candidate. She is someone who placed second in the National Collegiate Collecting Contest when she was an undergraduate at Cornell in 2012, and the collection was a expanded version of a collection she'd been working on for a long time, a great collection of American romance novels from the 1920s and 30s, all in their original jackets. And she had done a huge kind of almost like metadata analysis of like all the, what happens with prohibition in these books, and what happens with women entering the workplace, what happens with the Olympics, what happens with slang. I mean, she had just, she had taken this material that like each one of which you think of as ephemeral and sort of like not worth paying attention, but you read 300 of them and you look at all the trends in them, and you see that like actually a convention that's supposed to be extremely hidebound and resistant to change really had to torque hard in the 20s and 30s because American women's lives were changing so fast. They had to find new kind of plot resolutions because suddenly like the old ones didn't quite work. So it was just a fascinating project. She had for years been documenting all the books she bought, not all the books, but highlights of the books that she bought on a blog, which now, thanks to this contest, has become much visited because it's fascinating. Taking the pictures, but then also just talking about them in the context of the others. And that blog project, is ongoing, and she has no plans to stop it anytime soon because there's still stuff to learn. So that was our winner, Jessica Cahan, who's a public librarian in Ohio. She was really great. So we were very happy with how things turned out. We really enjoyed, everything that we found out. But this year we want to make the prize better, and we also want to get more. We want more than 48. We want more than 21 states. We want everyone. So part of it is that I'm happy. I was delighted to be invited here because I thought I can just tell everyone at the BSA, there's now your responsibility to go and tell the young women in your life who have, interesting interior lives and like passionate, quirky, weird collections on the side that this is an opportunity for them to have $1,000, or if not, at least to write something about their project, which will put them in a different place, in a different frame of mind the next time they go shopping. And so I would also welcome from this crowd any practical suggestions about how to describe what they should do for their bibliography, because it's something that we really struggle with, because we want, obviously we want it to be careful and thorough and precise, but we're also conscious of the fact that the more demands we make, the more it alienates a lot of the people whose collections are actually the ones we're most interested in seeing, honestly. So anyhow, that's it.